remarks playing out. Kevin Corke is traveling with the president in Beijing. Kevin.
Hey there, John. You know, you're right. Plenty of pageantry and promise as the president makes his way through China. Stop number 3, by the way, on that 5-country Asian tour. Next up, it is off to Vietnam. But while he was here, we did see a great deal happen, including a number of trade deals. We'll get to that in a bit. And even a bit of an agreement on North Korea. Of sorts. First to the pomp and circumstance and the pageantry, plenty of it. As the Chinese government really rolled out the red carpet during the president's visit here. No real surprise. It was an important visit for them. By the way, to be honest, it was also in stark contrast to the tough talk the president had for the Chinese government, especially on trade during the campaign. Perhaps a sign of a little on-the-job pragmatism by the president. Still, the two sides did agree, John, that a nuclear-armed North Korea is not only bad for the peninsula, it's bad for the world.
Today, President Xi, we discussed our mutual commitment to the complete denuclearization of North Korea. We agreed not to replicate failed approaches of the past, and there were many. We agreed on the need to fully implement all UN Security Council resolutions on North Korea and to increase economic pressure until North Korea abandons its reckless and dangerous path.
Reckless and dangerous path indeed. Meanwhile, a number of deals were announced here as well. Many of them, to be fair, actually began before the president took office, but we're talking about a big dollar number here, $250 billion in deals related to aircraft, auto parts, even food products. Still, it wasn't enough to quell the president's frustration over the massive trade gap between our countries.
Both the United States and China will have a more prosperous future if we can achieve a level economic playing field. Right now, unfortunately, it is a very one-sided and unfair one. But I don't blame China. But in actuality, I do blame past administrations.
Blaming past administrations, a not so veiled reference perhaps to his predecessor. Next, it's off to Vietnam for the APEC summit. A couple of days there. We have a crew en route. Of course, we got you covered, Amy Kellogg, John Roberts there. I'll see you in Manila, but for now, back to you.
Right, enjoy your travels with the president. Kevin Corke coming to us from China. Thanks, Kevin.
Here at home, the House Ways and Means Committee expected to finish its markup of the GOP tax bill soon, with Senate Republicans preparing to unveil their own tax legislation. Meanwhile, President Trump weighing in, referring to the Senate plan. The Wall Street Journal reports that he told Democrats in a conference call, quote, "You're going to like it a whole lot more." Joining me now is Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief of The Hill. What do you think Democrats are going to like a whole lot more about the Senate plan versus the House plan?
Well, I don't think Democrats are going to get on board with this bill. It is going to be different than the House bill, and they're going to unveil it in the next hour. There'll be differences on the state and local tax deduction as well as the home mortgage deduction. So this will be a different bill, and if it passes the House and the Senate, they will have to reconcile in conference. But we've heard a lot already from Democrats blasting the House bill, and I just think Republicans, just like on health care, they're going to need to unify. They can't count on Democratic votes. I don't think they're going to get any, but remember, there are a lot of Democrats in red states who are up for re-election in states that Trump won, so this could be used against them.
So Senate sources to our own Fox Business News, to Maria Bartiromo, saying that this plan that's going to come out in the next hour, this is what she is reporting, that it's going to delay the 20% corporate tax rate for 1 year, put that delay in place. What do you think about that? What would that mean?
Well, that would mean it would be less expensive. Remember, Bob Corker has said he doesn't want to add a lot of money to the deficit, and he's retiring, so he's a vote to watch. The state and local tax deduction change is going to completely eliminate it. And remember, there are no Republicans, unlike the House, who are serving in blue states, so that's not going to lose any Republican votes. But that could be a reason why Democrats vote against it. So this is going to be a difficult path forward. There are obstacles ahead, but if you look at the House side, at this point there were a lot more no votes on health care than they are on taxes. We're counting about 8 Republicans who've said no on this tax cut bill. So I think it's going to pass the House by a decent margin, but not easily.
But some of the changes, I mean, if Maria's sources are correct, some of the changes are things that could end up really roiling folks in the House.
Yes.
You know, removing the SALT deduction, you talked about that. That's the state and local income tax. Delaying that corporate tax rate for 1 year. I mean, there are a lot of people who believe that cut will provide a real economic boom. Delaying it for a year could be a total deal killer, because if you look back at the Reagan era, they feel like it was a huge mistake to delay until 81, that they got killed in 82 in the election because they hadn't seen the full, you know, economic growth package really hit, and that hurt Republicans.
Yeah, and they've already, and remember, the corporate tax rate, as you know, was initially going to be 15%, and then Paul Ryan and the president said, okay, let's move it to 20, because the math was very difficult as far as blowing a hole in the deficit. So they're compromising, but honestly, Melissa, I mean, I think they have to get this done no matter what. I mean, Tuesday's results showed that whatever they get through, they've got to get something through, or they're going to get really hit hard in both primaries and in the general election next year.
Okay, so to that point, here we go. It was Senator King saying, you know, we have to get something by. People are saying to that, Peter King saying, how can you vote for tax reform if it's going to increase taxes in your district? Great victory. We got the first tax reform in 30 years, and your taxes are going up. But it's okay, because we got it through. He's like, people would think you're nuts. He can't possibly vote for that. That makes sense if you're a Republican.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the Republican leaders are saying, listen, we are raising taxes in some areas, but overall we're doubling the standard deduction. So overall, that most people are going to get a big tax cut. But there's a lot of confusion. There has been some analysis from different think tanks and the CBO and the Joint Committee on Taxation. So there are a lot of questions about what this would do for middle-class families, and that's where the PR battle begins.
Yeah, and I don't know what postcard. So what we've seen so far is fitting on. It doesn't seem like that's happening yet, but there's still time. There's a lot of debate left. Bob Cusack, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, Vice President Pence visiting Texas to comfort a community in mourning. He participated in a vigil last night honoring the friends and neighbors lost when a gunman opened fire at church during Sunday services. 26 people died there, 8 of them children. Casey Stiegel, live in Sutherland Springs at the First Baptist Church, the scene of that heartbreaking crime. Casey?
Yeah, John, and it's a scene where we have seen people from the community just trickling by to lay flowers and wreaths, light candles, anything really to pay their respects. As you know, this investigation has many moving parts, one of which a key one, and it involves the gunman's iPhone. It is in possession of the FBI, and in fact, Apple has released a statement saying that it has offered technical assistance to the feds. Those special agents had not yet reached out to the iPhone maker looking for information on how to crack the security code to unlock the device. As we know, that mobile phone could contain a lot of clues about the shooter, his activities leading up to Sunday's crime, just as it did with the suspects in the San Bernardino shooting. 26 people were killed at the First Baptist Church, and they have now all been identified. We understand that it is about half of this small community's congregation. Among those who lost their lives, 8 children, including a baby and an unborn child. At last night's prayer vigil, attended by Vice President Mike Pence, while offering words of comfort, he was also critical of the Air Force's handling of Devin Patrick Kelly, a man who was discharged from the military who reportedly escaped from a mental health facility after sneaking guns onto an Air Force base and threatening his commanders. Now the Vice President wants to know why these red flags did not prevent the suspect from being able to buy any weapons at all.
We now know it was a crime that the assailant was ever able to purchase a firearm in the first place. He lied on his application, had a history of mental illness, and there were bureaucratic failures. I'm informed by Secretary Heather Wilson that the Air Force is moving aggressively to review why this error occurred.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions was also in attendance, including Texas Governor Greg Abbott. And back here you see the white crosses just behind me. A volunteer came out here and put these crosses up overnight. John 1 representing each of the lives lost here last Sunday.
Still so much pain there in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Casey Stiegel, thank you.
It is the third full day of jury deliberations in the bribery trial of New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez, but why jurors could have to start from scratch next week. Plus, Bill Clinton on Conan last night. You want to hear what he had to say about President Trump? Jurors are in their third full day of deliberations in the corruption trial of Senator Robert Menendez, the New Jersey Democrat charged with accepting lavish trips and gifts in exchange for political favors. Menendez appeared confident as he arrived at the Newark courthouse this morning.
Are you nervous?
Listen, the jury has family, children, jobs. I get, after 9 weeks, 60 witnesses, hundreds of pages, that they're doing their job. And they also have challenges at home. So, I'm happy to wait for the jury to come to a just verdict.
If a verdict is not reached by tonight, the judge says one juror will be excused for vacation and replaced by an alternate. The panel would then have to start deliberations all over again. Have fun.
Yeah. Could come today.
Yeah.
Breaking developments. Democrats making big gains in Virginia on Tuesday, winning the governor's race and flipping 10 state house seats in a victory widely viewed in the media as a repudiation of President Trump. Is it? Joining us now, our Fox News media analyst, Howard Kurtz. He is also host of Media Buzz, airing Sundays on Fox News Channel. A headline in the New York Times on Wednesday called it a big rebuke of Trump. Howie, is it?
Well, that's certainly the media narrative, and there's no question that Donald Trump was a significant factor in the Virginia race, John. But, what many pundits are just simply forgetting is that Virginia is basically becoming a blue state. It was won by Hillary Clinton. It was won twice by Barack Obama. And the danger here is getting caffeinated and over-interpreting a couple of off-year elections into projections that, wow, the Democrats now really have a good chance to take over the House, when in fact they have to pick up 24 seats, and many of those are in red states, much less friendly territory than Virginia.
And as you point out, nobody wanted to predict that Ralph Northam, the Democrat, was going to actually win that race ahead of the actual voting.
Yeah, the polls were tight, and then a lot of people thought Ed Gillespie, because he's a former chairman of the RNC, who, by the way, distanced himself from Donald Trump, and that has to factor into the analysis that he might pull it off. So the press was basically wrong or overcautious on that. At the same time, look, when we project what's going to happen a year from now, it's crazy because the Trump presidency may look very different a year from now than at the current situation when Donald Trump's still struggling a bit in the polls.
But after the loss, the president tweeted out his observation that he didn't feel that Ed Gillespie was enough of a Trump supporter, that he didn't embrace the president enough.
Well, there's no question about that. Gillespie is the classic Washington establishment lobbyist, former Bush White House aide. He didn't want the president to come campaign for him, to raise money for him. He barely mentioned Donald Trump's name, even though he tried to run on a couple of sort of hot-button Trump-like issues, such as immigration, such as Confederate statues. In the end, he was sort of caught in the middle. He didn't have the Trump supporters, and he may have alienated some more traditional Republicans.
In your piece on FoxNews.com, you write, America, in short, is not Virginia or New Jersey. So the implications of this, you think, are being stretched.
Yeah, and we do this every 4 years. If the New Jersey and Virginia gubernatorial elections were in another year when there were lots of other elections, it would kind of get lost in the shuffle. But right now, it's all the prognosticators have. They love to read the tea leaves, and I do think, well, certainly it was a big day for the Democrats. There's no question about that. It might be lending itself to a little bit of over-interpretation.
In case people were not watching Conan last night, the former President Bill Clinton took a swipe at President Trump. Listen to some of that.
The dictators club in the world, and there's a bunch of them, they want two things. They want nuclear weapons because they feel like they can never be dislodged, no matter how much people hate them, if they got nuclear power. and they want to abolish the line between fact and fiction and truth and lie. Look at the effort here to disenfranchise voters.
That seemed to be a pretty direct swipe at the current president, the 45th president of the United States. What do you make of that, Howard?
Well, it's classic Bill Clinton, which is he never actually comes out and says, I'm talking about Donald Trump. He starts talking about dictators around the world, and Conan looks at him and there's a couple of laughs. I mean, this is the sort of light touch that Bill Clinton excelled at. His wife never really had in either of her presidential campaigns. And of course, Conan's not going to follow up with a tough question about what do you mean about suppressing voters. So Clinton kind of takes his shot, but there's no line in the transcript where you can say, wow, he went too far.
Yeah, and it's curious that it came a year after President Trump defeated his wife in that, unexpected election result from 2016.
Yeah, I don't think Bill Clinton has forgotten that. And, we haven't heard much from him lately because so much attention has been on Hillary. She continues her endless book tour. She continues to take shots at President Trump. Some Democrats have been actually come out and said, especially after the whole Donna Brazile flap, that they wish Hillary Clinton would kind of get off the stage and let the Democrats focus on the next generation of leaders who might actually be able to win some seats next year or challenge the president in 2020.
Let's talk big media picture for a moment. AT&T wants to buy Time Warner, merge those two companies together. Time Warner owns CNN, AT&T owns DirecTV. Democrats never much liked the deal, but now there are concerns that the Justice Department could block it unless they spin off CNN and the Turner Media Group. President Trump has obviously had his issues with fake news. How big a story is this?
There's a bit of a perception problem for the administration because of the president's repeated attacks on CNN as fake news, and now reports that Justice Department officials have told AT&T that either you'd have to get rid of CNN and Turner Broadcasting or DirecTV. That's kind of a classic antitrust concern that comes up when you have two big companies that are on the verge of merging. So I don't think there's any evidence that the Justice Department is improperly pressuring AT&T, and I think that that's being a little bit overinterpreted. And by the way, even if CNN does get spun off, and so it's not going anywhere, somebody will continue it. So I think people who don't like this deal are using the CNN angle as a way of trashing it, but there's no firm evidence. In fact, the White House says President Trump has never discussed this with the Justice Department.
All right. Howard Kurtz, our media critic. We'll see you Sunday on Media Buzz. Thank you.
Great to see you, John.
So coming up, President Trump leaving China and heading to Vietnam tonight. So will he or won't he meet there with Vladimir Putin? Plus, why one well-known organization is calling our national anthem racist. Another development in the Star-Spangled Banner controversy, the NAACP in California wants Congress to get rid of the national anthem altogether. Members of the organization are calling it, quote, racist and anti-black. William Longinus joins us live with more on this. You're going to have to explain it to us, William.
Well, Melissa, the NFL kneeling controversy prompted the NAACP to take a closer look at the anthem, which contains a rarely sung third verse which talks about slaves. Now, the group claims those lyrics are racist, divisive, anti-black, and disqualify the Star-Spangled Banner as the national anthem. So you may recall Francis Scott Key wrote those words in 1814 as he watched British warships bomb Fort McHenry in Baltimore. It became the national anthem in 1916 and was later affirmed by Congress in 31. Now here are the lyrics the NAACP finds offensive. Quote, no refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave.
It's racist. It doesn't represent our community. It's anti-black people. The real intention got overlooked, and it's become something that's dividing us. And I'm looking for a way to bring us back together.
However, historians strongly disagree about the lyrics' meaning. Here's why. Hireling and slave referred to black slaves liberated by the British, some of whom were fighting against America. Now, to Key, they were mercenaries and traitors. But that doesn't mean the song celebrates slavery, historians say. Manipulated blacks with the promise of freedom. And elsewhere, lyrics in the song refer to blacks and whites alike as fighting for America as free men.
Is it offensive to you?
Not to me personally. I look at certain things as historic. and just a story of our history, something to learn from.
So right now, the NAACP is looking for a member of Congress to sponsor their bill to kill or change the Star-Spangled Banner as the national anthem. Back to you.
Wow. William Longinus, thank you.
Well, President Trump is trying to make good on a campaign promise to cut the U.S. trade deficit with China. Why our next guest says this is more of a symbolic measure. Plus, the next stop on the president's tour of Asia takes him to Vietnam, and the world will be watching to see whether he meets with one particular leader there.
We have been waiting for this. House Speaker Paul Ryan talking about the tax plan on Capitol Hill. Let's listen in.
Why is it a good idea to eliminate the state and local tax deduction in a bill that could make that a tougher vote for those vulnerable members and potentially get the majority?
I think when you take a look at tax reform, you have to take a look at the bill in totality. You have to look at the fact that we're doubling the standard. By doubling the standard, I lost my postcard. Jeez, I feel naked without my postcard in my pocket. By doubling the standard deduction, I was just going to see if I had an assist over there. No postcard. All right. Look, yeah, do you guys have a postcard on you? You don't have one? Okay, so Christina, by doubling the standard exemption, right there, 90% of Americans will fill out their taxes, picture this in your mind, on a form the size of a postcard. Number two, when you actually say for your first $24,000 instead of $12,000, that's tax-free. If you have children, you're going to have a $1,600 per child tax credit. When you're lowering people's tax rates, when you take the thing all in its totality, what the analysis shows us, whether it's analysis from JCT, from the Tax Foundation, or even TPC, that the average households at every income level see a tax cut. So I think when you take a look at the fact that this produces faster take-home pay, faster wages growth, faster economic growth, and bigger paychecks, I think it's going to be a good thing for everybody, no matter what state you come from.
These lawmakers are saying many of them can't vote for the bill because of this provision.
As you see, we also allow a $10,000 property tax deduction. So in conjunction with the discussions we've been having with our members in these particular states, hundreds of billions of dollars have been added back to the bill to accommodate those very legitimate concerns so that people are benefiting. Chad, don't yell.
You have been making the case to your members that the House control by the Republicans could be in jeopardy if you don't pass tax reform. That said, if you look historically what has happened in the first midterms of presidents, when they have passed big initiatives, crime bill in 1994, certainly Obamacare in 2010, and that party has lost. Explain to us why you think it is so essential that this would preserve the majority, because you don't get these majorities to set on them. You come to pass big policy and then burn some of those seats.
First of all, I think it's a very interesting analog, but I would say the crime bill in 93, Obamacare, those were unpopular bills. This is not unpopular. We're actually letting people keep more of their own money. We're cleaning out the loopholes of the tax code and having a fairer tax system. So we're going to have faster economic growth, bigger paychecks, fairer taxes. That's not an unpopular thing to do. And oh, by the way, this is something we ran on. We didn't do like some of the Democrat majorities of the past and pass some big, huge thing on an unsuspecting country. We ran in 2016 on doing this tax reform. The president ran on doing this tax cut and tax reform. So this is about fulfilling our promises to the American people. This is about actually improving people's lives and making a positive difference. And I fundamentally believe when we do this, make good on our word, make good on our promise, make people's lives better, we're going to be just fine politically. Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't do the yell out thing. Somebody get to him.
A lot of our viewers are concerned about the child adoption tax credit being not included in the House bill. Is that something you would like to see in the final bill, and have there been any efforts to preserve it?
I will direct you to the Ways and Means Committee and direct you to the markup today, and you should bring that question there because that's among the things that the Ways and Means Committee is considering. Casey.
Do you think the politics of healthcare belong in the tax reform package? You're talking about repealing the individual mandate as part of tax reform.
Well, that's one of the many things that our members are talking about. Those kinds of conversations are ongoing. Of course, I want to get rid of the individual mandate.
In this bill?
I want to get rid of the individual mandate any way I can because I think the individual mandate is doing great damage to people in this country. We're making people buy something they can't afford and don't want. So I personally do not think that this is good policy for our country, and I think it's wrecking our healthcare system. Whether or not it goes into any particular piece of legislation, those are the kinds of conversations we're going to have, along with many other issues with our members on an ongoing basis. Yeah.
Speaker, the Senate is releasing their bill today, and from what we've heard, it might be drastically different from what you guys have put out over here, either a phase in or phase out of the corporate tax rate, not full repeal of the state tax. They will fully repeal SALT, even though you talked about the importance of that compromise. Is that going to be problematic for resolving? Also, a Democratic aide overheard you joking with Mitch McConnell about going to conference. Are you guys seriously going to conference?
I think, put the political hack aside, we are going to conference, and that's the point I've been making is we're going to conference. That wasn't a joke. That was, I don't even know which hack did that. But, you know, if you were there, we're going to conference. Why are we going to conference? Because we're doing this the right way. We're doing this regular order. And yes, the Senate bill is going to be different than the House bill because you know what? That's the legislative process. But what's encouraging in all of this is, just as we discussed at the front end of this process, we have a framework that we established with the White House and the Senate, and these bills are being written inside that framework. But the House will pass its bill, the Senate will pass its bill, and then we will get together and reconcile the differences, which is the legislative process, and that's how this process will continue. Drucker.
Thanks. I wanted to ask you a follow-up on the politics of this. You talked a lot about how this will affect individuals and families, let's say earning anywhere from $50,000 to $150,000 a year, and that's important. But I think where Democrats think they can make some headway is with these upscale suburbs that have long been a part of the Republican coalition that are going to look at this. They own very expensive homes. They make more money than a lot of what you've been talking about.
Kind of ironic, isn't it?
Right, but they're in their view, these voters think to themselves that they're not starving, that they stop working, all their money goes away, and that the Democrats will then be able to make headway by saying the Republicans are passing a tax plan that is not helping you. Maybe your taxes are going up a little, maybe they're not going down at all. You just are rearranging the deck chairs, and you still need your accountant. Is there a problem for Republicans potentially with an important part of your coalition that helped you win in 2016 if the tax plan does help a lot of people, but doesn't help people that have been voting Republican for a long time?
We're not doing this for political benefit. We're doing this to help improve people's lives. We're doing this to get this country back on track. We're doing this to get economic growth. Look, we haven't had a 3% economy in about a decade. Do you know what happens to a country that grows so slowly? Wages are flat. Living standards get flat. Economic anxiety and insecurity goes up. That's what's happening in this country today. And you wonder why we have a lot of anxiety and a lot of polarization in America? I would argue when people are really worried about whether they can put food on the table or pay the energy bill next month, that's a real problem in America. The purpose of this legislation is focused on not giving the highest income earners the biggest tax breaks. The purpose on this legislation is giving middle income tax families a break. And you got to remember, half the country's living paycheck to paycheck. I just saw a survey that says a third of Americans feel that they're $400 away from a financial crisis in their family. That's who needs relief in this country. And oh, by the way, when you get our tax rates down on our businesses as deeply as we're dropping them in the bill we're proposing, that's good for everybody. That's good for jobs, it's good for wages, it's good for economic growth. And so this isn't an appropriations bill. This is an economic growth bill. This is a middle income fairness bill. This is a fairness bill which is, yeah, if you have an accountant and you can navigate all these deductions and loopholes, you can get a good deal. But why do we want to have a tax code that's so rigged? Don't we want to have a tax code that's simple and easy and fair? That's what we're trying to accomplish. And I would say, just look at all the analysis, whether it's TPC, JCT, or Tax Foundation, they all tell you that the average families in all income groups see a tax cut. Bonus.
Following up on that, a lot of those analyses that you cited, though, say that in the out years, more of these families will see a tax increase. That seems primarily...
You're talking about the sunsets, right?
Primarily due to the sunsets. Can you talk about why?
Sure.
Why you've chosen to do those sunsets? Why, when so many of the things on the corporate and business side are permanent, why not we'll make some of those things sunset to keep the middle class stuff? It's
a good question. You see both. You see the expansion provisions sunset. So you see business provisions sunset and you see some individual provisions sunset. But in our bill, the primary provisions, the big provisions like the rates and the child tax credit, those things are made permanent. Why? Because certainty is really important for economic growth. And that's why we believe if you sunset the wrong provisions, you will actually do damage to economic growth in forward planning. But what we also learned from the economic standpoint of the things that are sunset are done in a way that they won't damage economic growth. They will actually encourage economic growth. And also, it's just to be conformed with the rules. We have Senate budget rules that we have to be mindful of. And we want to make sure that when we pass a bill out of the House, that bill adheres to the Senate rules so that we can use the reconciliation tool that we need to use to pass tax reform. So those sunsets are things that are done to make sure that this bill conforms to the rules. We don't personally like it in the House, but we need to follow if we want to make sure that it's
some
privileged.
meaningful changes to this House Republican tax reform plan, but have not seen them yet. The Ways and Means Committee was scheduled to go into its fourth day of markup when lawmakers debate and offer amendments to the tax reform package.
Well, as
That's
you
been on hold.
know,
We expect they've been
we are
going over the
concerned that
changes
the
to the
dynamic
bill.
scoring
The plan has
would
been
not be
having
allowed
Ways
in
and
the
Means
Senate,
vote on
again,
it
because
today
of the
with
rules.
the House
But we are
overall
convinced, based
voting on the
upon
package next
lots
week.
of
One
research, lots
controversial
of
issue is
economic
whether folks from
modeling,
high-tax
that
states
you
like New
will see
York, New
faster
Jersey,
economic growth result from this bill. You will see
Thank you,
higher
everybody. Breaking
wages,
news now
more
from overnight.
jobs,
President Trump
bigger
has reached
paychecks,
the critical point
bigger
of this
GDP.
trip. He's
And
in
if you see
Beijing
a
right
bigger
now, sitting
economy,
down
that
with the
means you get
Chinese
more
president,
revenue. So we're
mixing
confident
praise
there's
and
two
tough
things you need
talk,
to do to get our fiscal
urging
house in
Beijing
order.
to do more to rein in
Grow
its
the economy,
neighbor,
get people working
North
and paying
Korea.
taxes,
Trade is on the line
and
as
deal
well
with
there.
spending,
Good morning,
especially
everybody.
entitlement spending.
Big day
We got
today.
more
I'm
work to
Bill
do on that
Morning.
front.
What
The
a
House
week.
has passed
Indeed it
bills
is.
All right, good
over
morning,
and over
Bill.
on
I'm
that.
Sandra Smith.
We got more work
President
to do on
Trump.
that front, but that doesn't mean you stop working to growing the economy. And this is our signature issue, the most important thing we can possibly do to get a bigger economic pie for all Americans by growing this economy, which is really important for our fiscal future.
Last question. Mr. Speaker, about a dozen House Republicans just a few hours ago called for DACA to have some sort of have a fix by the end of the year. Do you think it's important that DACA have a fix by the end of the year? And would you be willing to consider it as part of the stopgap or spending?
I think it should be considered separately on its own merits. Number one. Number two, we have until, I believe, March is the deadline we have with the president. So I don't think there's really any need to have artificial deadlines within the one we already have. Having said that, though, our members are having lots of conversations. We have a working group on this issue, and that working group is now going to spread out and start talking to our broader conference. I also met with some members of the Senate who are also forming their own working group. So active discussions are underway with our members about how the DACA solution should occur. But I don't think we should put artificial deadlines in front of the one we already have. And I do think it should be considered separately. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Okay, that was House Speaker Paul Ryan. He was taking questions on the tax reform bill, trying to make the point that no matter which think tank you look at, they're saying that the average taxpayer in all income groups will see a cut. He faced questions about in the out years when those things sunset. But overall, he was trying to make the point that the economic pie is going to grow. We will see. John.
Let's get some political discussion about that underway. Joining us now, Isaac Wright, the former executive director of Correct the Record Super PAC. That's a pro-Clinton super PAC that was up and running in 2016. Also, Brad Blakeman, former deputy assistant to President George W. Bush. So, Isaac Wright, you do not like the speaker's math. He says, you know, we got to grow this economy. It's been a decade since we've seen 3% growth, and this tax cut plan is the way to do that. What don't you like about it?
Well, I think the problem is the priorities, and the priorities are wrong for our country. The tax cut, which Democrats have been on the record, we're for tax reform, we're for tax cuts for the middle class, for working families. The problem is at the outset of the tax cut we're talking about, 50% of the benefit goes exclusively to the wealthiest 1%. At the end of 10 years, bipartisan analysis says that jumps up to 80%. In the meantime, middle-class families making $50,000 to $90,000 a year are going to get 8% of the benefit of this tax cut. And at the same time, they're going to give up deductions for things like student loans, for medical care, for all these things that middle-class families have relied on that are now going to get more expensive under this tax plan in order to fund tax cuts for the already wealthy so they can buy their third home in the Alps. That's not our priorities as a country.
Brad, I suspect you see it differently.
I do, and we don't take into account, I think, the growth opportunity that we have. We're already doing well on Wall Street. It's how well Main Street is doing. And I think the fairness of this tax plan in the House plan is something that is going to revolutionize the way Americans not only report their taxes, but the amount of money they're able to keep. The rate reductions, repatriating money, trillions of dollars offshore, coming back to America. That's important because businesses are going to grow, they're going to buy equipment, they're going to hire more people, wages are going to rise. So Democrats don't ever like to talk about growth because it's growth in the private sector. They rather have us send our money to the government for them to spend us for us. No, those days are over. We're going to make the American people the stewards of their own money.
Isaac, let's check the math there for just a second. Because Democrats are for jobs and growth. The problem is that's the opposite of this tax plan. When you lower the foreign profits tax to 0%, you are incentivizing corporations and business to say, hey, if you outsource American jobs overseas, you can pay 0% on those profits. Republicans are giving a giveaway and a motivation to corporations to outsource our jobs to other countries. This is Orwellian doublespeak that we have to be careful of. Another problem in the math, there's about $1 trillion budget hole here that nobody on the Republican side has acknowledged. We're going to be borrowing money from our grandkids to pay for tax cuts for the wealthiest 1%. There's a moral problem with the fact we're borrowing against future generations to pay for tax cuts for the wealthiest 1% that will at the same time incentivize outsourcing our jobs in this country.
But the argument, Brad, is that if you put more money into the economy, you give people more money to spend, then the economy grows and you get more tax revenue as a result.
Common sense. Democrats don't seem to get it. The fact is, it's not Americans sending government money for them to spend. It's having Americans change money between themselves. It's called the velocity of money. Every time a dollar changes hands in the private sector is what builds the private sector. It's not the government has never created a private sector job. It's the private sector creating their own. It's small businesses. It's the pass-through now that is going to give individuals who operate as corporations a lesser rate. It's repatriating trillions of dollars, by the way, which Democrats kept overseas. If the Democrats would have repatriated that money, we would have seen a recovery a lot quicker and more robust after the recession. So Democrats don't get it. They don't like the fact that government is releasing their hold on America's pocketbooks. It's Americans who have to be incentivized to create their own destiny in America.
Those are the arguments.
I appreciate Brad speaking from my party there. I do want to correct the point. Democrats believe that if you put money back into the economy with tax cuts for working people, it helps. Giving 50 to 80% of that to the wealthiest 1% to buy a second home in the Alps or incentivize them to take jobs overseas does not.
Not too many second homes in the Alps from this country. Anyway, we got to go, gentlemen. Isaac, Brad, thank you both. Be back in a moment.
President Trump is talking trade in China. The president emerging from meetings with Chinese President Xi to praise the very trade practices, sort of, that he slammed on the campaign trail.
It is a very one-sided and unfair one, but I don't blame China. After all, who can blame a country for being able to take advantage of another country for the benefit of its citizens? I give China great credit.
The Senate's top Democrat, Chuck Schumer, firing back in a statement saying the president may not blame China, but I do. And so do millions of Americans who voted for him and others who have lost their jobs at the hands of China's rapacious trade policies. Joining me now is Oriana Schuyler Mastro. She's assistant professor of security studies at Georgetown University and a Jeane Kirkpatrick scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. If I were to interpret what he said, it sort of sounded like it was similar to what he says about tax policy. You can't blame people who use the loopholes, who do all the things that are in the code because it's legal. You blame the people who wrote the code, and made it ridiculous. And he's sort of saying there with China, you can't blame China for taking advantage of deals that other people let them have. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think that there's nothing really surprising with what President Trump did while he was in China. I previously thought that he would focus on these economic issues, largely because, as you mentioned, his campaign promises had to do with the fact that he promised some better trade deals for the United States. The problem is the trade deficit with China is due to many things, including the fact that China doesn't really play fair. They don't have an open market, and U.S. companies don't have the same types of opportunities there as Chinese companies have here. So what we really needed was structural economic reform, but I'm not surprised that the president didn't actually get there. Instead, he tried to pursue some symbolic wins for the United States.
Well, but in fairness, I mean, how do we know what went on? You know, I mean, they have all these conversations behind closed doors. They make deals. They do things. I mean, we only know what we're reading from reporters there and what he's saying publicly. What counts is what goes on behind closed doors.
Well, I will tell you, from looking what Xi Jinping has said, most recently there was a big meeting of Chinese leaders at the 19th Party Congress, in which the leader of China, Xi Jinping, said that his philosophy is that the party will have complete control over every aspect of society, politics, and the economy. Most economists and China specialists said that at that meeting, any hope of China pursuing market reforms were dead. And after Xi Jinping and President Trump signed some economic agreements, all of those agreements being non-binding, by the way, they were just, you know, understandings, memorandum of understanding. She said that China would pursue market reform at the pace and timetable according to China. So I think what that tells us is that China wanted to give some symbolic wins to the United States, but they really have no plans of opening up their economy to the degree that we hope that they will.
The New York Times sort of disagrees with that idea in the sense that they said yesterday that they think that the president, there's an unspoken quid pro quo, that he's holding back on economic punishment in exchange for help with North Korea, that it's never really about punishing China over trade practices, that it's sort of the carrot and the stick, and that's the stick. We'll beat you to death on trade unless you help us with North Korea. What do you think about that?
Well, I do think that the tone that the president struck while he was in China was a positive one, right? Instead of using fiery rhetoric or criticizing China for its policies on North Korea, he was relatively cooperative in his tone. And while we should criticize China for many of its policies, there's no need to be unnecessarily provocative. But anyone who negotiates with China knows that that kind of tacit quid pro quo doesn't really work. China has this phrase in which they pursue win-win agreements, and anyone who knows China means that that means China wins first and then they win again. So I think he might be disappointed.
We will see. Thank you so much for your time today. We'll be right back.
Thank you for having me.